Hey.
Happy Friday, everybody. It is Rabble Rants Live. We made it to the end of another hectic political week, and we have some friends in the studio to help us unpack it all. As always, from a anti-capitalist and really angry perspective, but constructive. But constructive, right? Because the second half of the show, we provide disruptive updates from across Turtle Island, sometimes beyond, as well as activist tips for folks. We want you out there disrupting and knowing exactly how to do it as safely as possible. So, let's introduce the panel that we've put together for today's Rabble Rants. I just muted Jen's mic quickly there because of the background noise, but Jen, when you chime in to introduce yourself in a second. As always, my name is Jessa McLean. I'm the host of Blueprints of Disruption, and Joe is my co-host, a regular now on the show, and very appreciative.
Like
No, way more functional than most of the furniture I've got. But happy Friday, Joe. Happy to have you.
Happy Friday indeed.
Cory's also back with us.
Oh. Yep.
Yay. Thanks for jumping in there last minute, Cory. I think there's probably some juicy topics you've been looking to unpack, vent, rant about.
Always got something to say.
You've been practicing on your coworkers?
That's right.
Yes. Cory also has a podcast, The Skeptical Leftist. So I hope his handle's in his description there. He's too small of a thumbnail now for me to tell, but we'll drop your links in the discussion there as well. And Jen, welcome, Jen. It's your first time on Rabble Rants. You want to introduce yourself to folks before we start?
You bet. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Evans. I'm a mutual aid volunteer and an AI consultant, which is a very interesting combination, let me tell you, in Toronto, and I'm very happy to be here. Sorry for the background noise.
No, actually, it's a lot better now. I don't know. I think you had something passing by you there. But welcome, Jen. You said it, I didn't. It was a very interesting combination. I was, looking at your bio and typing out the description. I was like, I'm going to run with this. I'm pretty sure I read that right. So maybe we'll have to have you on Blueprints to really talk about what you do. I do follow you now on X. I'm sure I did before as well. But I see even a lot of mutual aid threads on your feed. And yes. I guess that's part of what you do. But welcome. You ready to talk some politics?
Oh, yeah. Always.
Good. I'm sure that's why Joe thought to invite you on there today. So, yeah. So what are we going to talk about today? Usually we have a lot of headlines, but I feel like we're going to spend some time on some of these. So we can't not talk about the tariffs. I feel like that's all you see in your feeds right now is the tariffs, people's response to it, the brewing nationalism that is coming along with it. We'll talk about that, obviously. Before we get there, though, this morning, I hate a lot of retweets of Six Buzz. I won't do that, but we will talk about what they reported this morning that, it's not really news. The Prime Minister declaring himself a proud Zionist. The big sigh, groan, eye roll. We'll have it all. Hydro-Quebec lost a big case, but don't worry, it's actually a good thing in the courts. So that talks about Indigenous rights in Quebec, but that leads us also to a discussion on Grassy Narrows. They're in the news again this week for multiple reasons. We'll tell you why and why you should care and what you can do to help. A lot of times the things we talk about have calls to action. And if you've got your own call to action that we have not talked about, the comments are there. We do highlight them and work them into the discussion. So please use them. I've highlighted one now. It's like, hi, Jen. So someone, Tara, is very excited to see you. There it is again. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about Trudeau since that was this morning, and we don't have a lot of time left to talk about Trudeau. He's on his way out.
In like a week.
A week.
Like 2 days or something. Like, don't we have?
We've got a convention. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So officially, the Liberal leadership race is going to be ending on Sunday, and we're going to be
On
finding out who the
Sunday.
new leader is. So at that point, it'll be obviously whoever our new prime minister is until between now and October. Then that all changes. Obviously,
Yeah,
it's
so
gonna
we'll be shitting on Mark Carney this time next week.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
could be for just a week. You never know.
right? Well, like Trump says, Trudeau's going to use this to hold on to power, so he may know more about Canadian politics than all of us, but I doubt it. So this may be our last chance to, like, timely talk about Justin Trudeau. And well, I mean, I was talking nicely about him just last week. There was a deal with about the Hydro-Quebec we were talking about. I gave him some creds there, but no, today he reaffirmed for everybody that he is a proud Zionist. I'll let you folks, anybody want to comment on that? Is this your first time hearing that?
No, I heard it last night, and it's funny. I was drafting a post for X, and it was on the Prime Minister's tears, which I think are another very interesting thing that's happened with him in the past few days. Something we rarely see on the Canadian political scene is a Prime Minister with tears in his eyes, giving a live press conference, and I thought that was moving, and I think it's something that will probably define his prime ministership when he's talked about in the future. And so for a moment, it was like, this is a beautiful thing we're watching, although he's been criticized heavily for that as well. And then, of course, we have the Zionist statement, unfortunately. So we're...
what I might suggest is that I actually play the Zionist statement in case people watching haven't seen it yet. Just for context.
Yeah.
I have it.
This is the one from May 2024, though, yeah? And he's just...
This is the one that you had tagged, so I think
thank
it is.
you. Yeah, so, yeah.
In a country like Canada, it should be, and it must be, safe to declare oneself a Zionist, Jewish or not. Zionism is not a dirty word or something anyone should be targeted for agreeing with. It is the belief, at its simplest, that Jewish people, like all peoples, have the right to determine their own future. Shortly after the Holocaust, Israel was established as a safe haven for Jewish
let's cut
people,
it there.
a place to live in security.
It's just literally not what it means.
No. When I first heard this, I wanted to get really mad, but part of it I have to agree with on some level that it physically, I guess you should be safe. It's really hard to you should be physically safe to say you believe in a certain political ideology, because I'm not going to start advocating for that shit, because most people do not like our politics at all. And I think we fall into this trap a lot where we're like, fuck them, jail them, deport them, I hate them. And it's like, okay, but they could, those are tools that we would never condone used against us. We would have all kinds of arguments there, but it is a dirty word. It is a dirty word. I mean it as a slur, but I will use it factually, right? I think we saw Eve get arrested for calling someone a fascist and a genocide supporter, but there are names a Zionist, they're calling themselves that. So what do y'all think?
When I remember watching this last year, and I've, as some of you guys know, I've got some personal ties in regards to using Zionism as a dirty word or not. And even last year when I heard him doing this speech and talking about the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism and how they're tying this in, and this is exactly what it is. Is anti-Semitism bad? Absolutely. Is anti-Zionism bad? No. Why? Two different things. One is about religion and your freedom to be your religion without any persecution of it, because that's wrong. While Zionism is about a political ideology, and criticizing a political ideology isn't anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
If you criticize, if you say criticizing Israel and Israel's policy is anti-Semitic, then you need to understand that criticizing Iran's policies is Islamophobic. And if one sounds ridiculous, but not the other one, that's a bit of hypocrisy.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction, Joe. Unfortunately, though, I think proclaiming that right now in this environment can be interpreted as a form of Islamophobia because, I mean, for obvious reasons. It basically is isolating Muslims and specifically Palestinians at a time when we need to be embracing folks who have been persecuted, not just for the past year and 4 months, but for much longer. And there was a point in time where there seemed to be some form of I hate using this word, but tolerance, acceptance. And now we seem to be in an environment where it's every person for themselves again. And I think, the prime minister proclaiming himself essentially on one side can have really significant impacts.
Yeah, it does. I mean,
Well, and there's a need here in Canada to support that kind of viewpoint, right? That it's a legitimate thing to be a colonial settler state.
Yep.
Right? Well,
Yeah.
where are we going to start as, the federal government starts criticizing that? I mean, I would love them to just open up that wide open and let us discuss what that means. But yeah, we saw Tucker Carlson also start talking about how like white people deserve their own state. And like this is where it leads, where you condone one form of an ethno state. And, when you say it that way, it sounds so ridiculous, but that's what Israel is, right? An ethno state, something that as a socialist, there's absolutely no fucking room for that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not a good declaration to be coming from our PM, and I don't think any of his replacements would argue with his viewpoint. So that's a little
That's
grim.
very true. Yeah.
I got into a bit of a tiff on TikTok on this, like, who is a Zionist, who isn't, and it was on Wob Canoe. So there's a young gentleman, and I forget his name on TikTok, young high schooler from the United States. He regularly posts about Palestine, and he had posted something about Wob Canoe, like letting in some Palestinian children and highlighting their case and saying they deserve to live a peaceful life. Obviously all true. But he is also an open Zionist. Like, he gives speeches to various organizations and declares Israel's right to defend itself and all those usual tropes, and provides cover to them. And they were under the impression that because he was an NDP premier, because he was an indigenous premier, that he absolutely could not be a Zionist. And I think there's some confusion for folks who like just think it's a slur, like it's like a word you could throw out there, but it has like factual grounding, right? Like, if you believe that the state of Israel should exist in the way that it does, right, as a Jewish state, then you're a Zionist, right? Like, that is the homeland, and there's a level of racial superiority built into that, and you believe in that, and you either are or you aren't. I can come at you politically for that, but Wob Canoe absolutely is a Zionist. He's never retracted those statements. He's repeated them a year after, at open forum publicly. So he lives by those words. So I don't care if you support bringing in refugees. You don't think Zionists support bringing in refugees? They're trying to ethnically cleanse that land. They absolutely believe in taking in refugees. You can't just pat some on the head and all of a sudden absolve yourself from providing cover to the Zionist state. So, I know that's just pointing to NDP. Everyone gets all really upset about that, but
There's also talk in the U.S. of another Muslim ban this morning. I don't know if any of you've seen that, but these things are not unconnected, right? So,
yeah, no, they are not. No, and that's why we draw attention to them too. Sometimes south of the border, right? It's all it all plays out. We're not completely unaffected, which is kind of the perfect segue to the tariff discussion. Good grief. Cory, like, you didn't say much on the last one, and I know you've been talking about it all week. Like, what the fuck is going on there? Like, what is he thinking? I think, like, I broke it down, like, what is going on? What is his real agenda? Like, so many questions.
Well,
Take it away,
sorry.
Rob.
like the one article that you shared said, like it looks now like it's mostly about the auto industry and getting that moved back down into Michigan and in the US. But I still think that it's just like every single month it's going to be the tariffs are on, the tariffs are off, the tariffs are on, the tariffs are off, because it's just a looming threat. We can get what we want no matter what it happens to be this week. And we can constantly say, oh, but if you don't give it to us, we're going to put tariffs on. And yeah, it's clear that he doesn't care about like the North American free trade, which, I mean, I've said this before too, is like, if he wants to pay full price for our resources, that's fine. But I get the impression that he is interested in turning Canada into just a colony.
Yeah, you think that's his end game? I mean, the prime minister, that was the press are doing a decent job there trying to get him to describe it. And I do not like this man, obviously, our previous segment there, but I haven't even taken that banner down. That's how upset I was. But he is handling this very well. They're like, what would you call it now? And he's like, Thursday. It's just like, it's something fucking different every day. And he lists all the things he's had to deal with PM. And I'm like, he's so happy to be out. Like, this is such a ping pong game. So we had a month reprieve. Then the month reprieve was up right as they're about to take effect, or as they take effect, or we don't fucking know if they ever went into effect. But like, then some of them have been taken off. Nobody can keep up with it. I'm so glad I'm not like a business owner or industry leader that has to try to keep up with this. Yeah. I love how he said to the auto sector in the United States, okay, fine, you have another 30 days to establish, multi-billion-dollar plants throughout the US so you can start making vehicles, but you're going to make those vehicles with tariffs on steel and aluminum coming from Canada, so have fun with that. Annexation. So finally he committed to, he thought, Trudeau thinks Trump is softening Canada economically to make way for annexation. And this week we saw him say to Congress that, he was speaking to the great people of Greenland. I can't do a Trump impersonation, but the really great people of Greenland, like, we're going to come save you. We're going to make you rich, he says. Like, he's still trying to sell the American dream. Like, I don't think anyone's bought that for a while, but
yeah. He's trying to do it in Canada too, so.
Yeah.
He's trying to sell to us too, and we're like, nope.
That we would be better off financially if we just were the next American state.
No, the best one is, come join us. You'll have better health care.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, he did.
No.
Yeah, he has. He said, join us. You'll have better health care. Like, none is somehow better?
Even my conservative friends at work know better than that.
Yeah.
What are they saying?
Oh, everybody's mad. Nobody likes Trump right now.
Yeah.
I have a theory that this is really about empire building for him. He thinks he's like the modern day Alexander. He's going to get the Panama Canal. He's going to get Greenland. He's going to get Canada. He's going to do some major unification process of all of these disparate and currently non-American entities, and he's going to redefine what the planet looks like. Like, I'm not joking. I think that's what he's all about right now.
I'm laughing, but I know you're not joking.
Yeah.
Like, I tried to explain that to my mom. I'm like, no, like, this is how imperialism works. You all can't live the fruits of imperialism for so long and learn it in your history books and be like, ha ha ha, that's just for the global south. And then assume it would never, ever get to a point where your resources were the resources that imperial state that you propped up all these years might need. Like, this is why I teach my kids, you're not friends with bullies. If they're mean to other kids on the school park, or they're mean to your sister, no, like, they're a no-go, right? Like, you don't just assume that you won't be the next person. So, when he starts making jokes about Greenland, we should be equally as pissed, or any moves he makes against Greenland. And related, not unrelated, BlackRock just bought up 2 of the major ports in Panama. I mean, I don't really have time to unpack what BlackRock is. Please Google if this is like just Greek to you, but like these are the moves he said before, Greenland and Panama were needed for international, like he's saying what Jen's saying. He's creating an empire. He needs it for, he says, their safety, but international peace and prosperity and safety. He needs it. We're going to get it one way or another.
Which are all completely fascist terms and are used to suppress the populations of acquired or annexed countries / areas like what he's planning to do to us.
Mm-hmm. So, like, I hate that Ford is handling this the way that he's handling this. I mean,
has he actually canceled Starlink yet? Does anybody know?
He says he has, and he won't even put it back on, even if the tariffs are lifted. He's also said that he's going to, starting Monday, put 25% tax on Ontario electricity going to 3 states. I didn't have time in my notes to name those states, New England, parts of New England. And that will stay even if the tariffs are turned off. Because, they're just going to toy with us. It's like, that's the next promise, another 30-day reprieve. And how he thinks anyone's just going to keep placating. I mean, last time we talked about this and we bought ourselves another 30 days, it was the fentanyl SAR that we were already really doing. And it was like fucking peanuts and stupid and has nothing to do with fentanyl or saving people from drug poisoning. But, it's like, you can't keep tricking people and leading them that way. They eventually have to take a stand.
Or you can. And I think, what Ford's doing is he's participating in our gaslighting. He's helping Trump essentially sell this to us, although it doesn't seem to be working very well.
No. And threatening to turn off the electricity, I was kind of trying to I know everyone's like, go get them. But
flick the lights.
Do you remember the blackout, people? I'm not sure we can safely turn off all of that electric. We sell it to them because we make excess amounts of it also. So I'm not sure, I'm not an electrical grid expert, but that just seems like a bad idea. I'm going to just chalk that up. And then these are working class Americans. I know American has this taste to it now, right? But these are working class people, right? In our atmosphere, on our planet. And I know we need to take a stand, but some of the tactics we're suggesting would be extremely harmful only to the poorest of people. Rich people are going to be able to pay their hydro bill still with a 25% tax on it, but not everybody will. Whether their grid can just take it from elsewhere, I don't really understand that. But we have to be careful that our responses are cognitive to our stand. Well, at least I'm looking at Cory for sure, our internationalist stand that we are one global working class movement, right? And
there is a lot of work that's done in regards to energy trade. Ontario is part of the northeastern one of the northeastern grids, which is all connected between all these different states, and the different areas and generation plants are going to be doing trades in regards to selling it to different areas. They do this all the time, every day. Brookfield Power is actually one of the companies that does that said trades, surprisingly enough.
It's owned by Mark Carney. I think maybe not everyone knows that.
Yeah, so they do quite a bit of exchanges. If they do tariffs, they're going to try to readjust and try to make sure they're going to try to source their power from within internal, so that everybody kind of balances out. Will this still cause an effect? Possibly a little bit, because it might still generate a little bit of increase, since they are consuming a lot of power at a really low rate from Canada, because we're trying to dump excess nuclear power we have, particularly overnight. The other problem I have with this, though, is aside from us exporting and everybody looks at it as a good thing, is it's going to be affecting blue states. This is what's in this area that's using our power. And it's not that I think it's, I'm taking a political stance in regards to this, in regards to, do I want red or blue? I do want red, but because the only way it's going to affect Trump is if his supporters start turning on him. And if we're doing it to blue people, well, he doesn't view them as supporters anyways. He won't care. But if we do it to red states, then he will. This is why all our other tariffs are targeting red states.
Right.
I get they're going to suffer either way. I mean, under these these calls by Trump,
Correct.
like economic and all the other decisions, like they are going to suffer. And he's even trying to warn them of that, right? Like he's previously promised that he would make, you know, their food cheaper right away and like save them. And now he's having to look them in and make speeches about the tough days ahead. And I imagine they're not just in Canada, especially, but especially in Canada, all the fucking Trump supporters here are having existential crisis. Like I don't just pew. They don't know what to think anymore. Like they need study groups going. Like I hope you folks are just being really reflective and trying to unpack your politics right now. But in even in the United States, I think they're going like, oh shit.
Yeah,
You know,
they
like
are.
when your president tells you to buckle up rather than trying to gloss over it, like there's no COVID. We're fine. We're doing great. Like that was his spiel last time when they were like crashing and burning. And now he's like, okay, people, you know. So
Well, and he actually said this during the campaign. He said, you know, there's going to be a lot of pain coming. I don't know if you remember hearing that. I think it was during one of his many conversations with Musk. And he said there's going to be a period of adjustment when we are making these changes, and it's going to be very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And the issue that seems to be triggering Republicans at some of the town halls that I've seen, because they had this town hall campaign, which is now apparently on hold because the
I bet.
blowback has been so bad. But it's been the issue of veterans benefits, which have been suspended. And there's outrage at so many of these town halls. People are starting to turn. And if that happens on a mass scale, I mean, the only thing that seems to really move him is the stock market. But eventually, public support or lack thereof will become a factor for him as well, because he loves being popular.
yes, I should bring it down one time. I've got a child's first book of Trump, and it's like the illustrations are wonderful, and it's like a warning of Trump as a figure, and he's just like this orange blob, and it's incredibly funny. But it does, like, the warning there was like, the more oxygen you give somebody like that, the more dangerous it is. But then at some point, you know, now that he's president and enacting all of these things, is like, well, we can't not talk about him either. But popularity is important, but I mean, maybe not so much if you're 4 years away from an election, you know, like depending on what his end fucking goal is. And if he's able to sell like this need for natural resources or security, the American public seem to be willing to do a lot and give up a lot for those things. Historically speaking, they've not really flinched at any of their foreign policy, save for, you know, Vietnam and a bit of fight back against their Iraq war. But otherwise, most folks are, you know, hanging ribbons for their soldiers and yeehaw in it. And like that nationalist that's brewing up here too is like, I'm not really happy at all about it. We worked really hard to shit on that flag. Both sides.
You're
I felt
not
like
happy to see Joe back? And I don't mean Joe, our Joe. I mean the other Joe.
especially no. Yeah, okay, so Jen's talking about there might be some youngsters here. Joe is like that beer commercial that's making around. I am Joe. This is everything it means to be Canadian, and if you don't fit the mold, I don't know
Canadian
what you
beer
are.
commercial, right?
Is it beer?
It was originally a Molson Canadian commercial.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was based on Molson Canadian back to about 20 years ago. Trust me, I heard about the commercial a lot, having the name Joe. And now he goes by, the actor's going by his original name, which is Jeff. And so he did the newest version of it, and it was quite patriotic. He even, in regards to standing for it, it's very popular. You even got Trudeau, who was actually posting it on Twitter.
And Jagmeet.
So everybody, again, it's very common in Canada we've always had this for the longest time. If the Americans try to, or anybody else tries to pretty much absorb us or mix us in with the Americans, we have a reflex to just come out with the Canadian identity. And it's understandable. It's kind of a defensive thing because we just don't want to be called American, particularly if we're here or if we travel.
Yeah.
Be honest here. If we're in a country, yeah. And so this is where it comes from, and this is where it'll always go. Going deeper into what Canada is, it gets complicated, obviously, and we get issues with it. But right now, in the midst of a trade war, you're going to see a lot of people doing that, and I totally get it. It's still problematic, but it is also, we're dealing with a nut bar who wants to bring us in. And we're also, and it's also weird because, again, we've had this nationalism where we're doing this, but literally 6 months ago, we've had people running through the malls in Toronto saying Canada first, mass deportation. We've had, the Proud Boys running around saying Canada first. And now Pierre is slapping on a sign, and a lot of people are like, that's not a bad idea.
I do appreciate, like the bunch ups or the collages of Pierre saying Canada sucks, Canada sucks, Canada sucks, and then now he's got to try and backtrack that. He's got to try and rebuild that. Like, oh no, I love Canada, and we're different than the United States.
But it's so broken and broken and broken.
Yeah.
But not too broken. Not too broken that you don't want it. You don't want us. But it's not the way to go. I don't like to see a resurgence of that kind of talk, and I imagine they're gonna outdo each other on the campaign trail. And I think we posted something before. It was trying to show people that, like, all of your major parties are staunch nationalists, like, invoking this imagery and stuff, and people are like, but not the NDP. So that's why I had to chirp in. No, absolutely. They are all going to be like, this is what I'm going to do for Canadians. This is, I am more Canadian than you, and it's going to be gross, especially if even like leftists are feeding into it with the nationalist fervor. Like, I get the Buy Canada, but folks, our oligarchs are pieces of shit too, right? They just don't flaunt it as much. Like, they're meeting with our politicians behind closed doors and not in their cabinet, but some of them are in the cabinet, so it's like, we're not like that far off. It's like all of this comparison that we make, it's, you're just going to make a different rich person richer. It's a local one. Yay. Like, there are benefits, but let's keep our class consciousness during these times, right?
That's right.
Please.
Yeah.
It is nice to see Poilievre losing steam, though, I have to say. And it does feel good to be, I don't know, there's something primal about being a group at certain times. And I know, there are so many evils that come along with nationalism, but to feel a little bit less divided and a little less like that we're at each other's throats. And there's all this, the negativity that's been coming from Poilievre and the Conservatives has been unproductive and deafening. And it's I gotta say, it feels a little bit good to see that lose some steam.
That's fair.
Yeah, the polls are just something different, and I had a feeling, a leadership race would do that, but I don't think I think we underestimated what Trump would do in his first few days to shake up. I mean, last week we were talking about global order, so we won't get into that. But let me tell you, like, just a side note before we move into the two cases of Indigenous land rights cases, and two really good headlines to talk about, but I logged on to Matthew Green's IG Live. I think he does it like every morning. It's like Parliament to the People. And, backstory, I am not a big fan of the NDP. So many reasons, some of them very personal, okay? But I sat and I listened to him, and he was so fucking fired up. So he had logged in like immediately after reading Trump's latest statement on Gaza about sending Israel everything it needed to finish the job against Hamas. And, he was just really mad. And you could see it. Politicians, they never talk truths, right? Like, you can almost, I don't know, my my pattern recognition kicks in. I'm just like, you're lying. You're not, like, they don't believe what they're saying. But like, I don't like giving him any credit, honestly. It pains me to say this, but he was speaking the truths that we all need to hear. Like, he was talking about, this is imperialism. This is what imperialists do. He was talking about the fact that the international law and order that we've been calling on to fix all of this was only ever meant to serve the United States. It's not designed to hold them accountable. talked about wanting to yeet the system, saying I'm fourth party, like really making candid confessions of the inadequacies of being fourth party, of his position, the shortcomings of the NDP, how like demanding loyalty, like, a lot of things. He went on for maybe 20 minutes, and he ended it with giving like real concrete advice for deep canvassing and like organizing from the grassroots. Like he made it into something constructive. But I was really surprised to see how candid he was. But I can imagine he must be feeling pretty helpless. A lot of the folks watching this at the federal level, like federal politicians, like they're coming after your sovereignty. You couldn't imagine this being more of a crisis, right? Like as a federal politician, and very few people in that position are going to get a say in this. So yeah, he's in a tough spot, so I'll give him that. But I don't know if he posts that up on his IG Live. It was from yesterday, so March 6th. And it was an interesting interaction. There was only like a dozen people on there to witness it. I took a screenshot of, like, he goes on at the beginning. I thought he was like a little unhinged, to be honest. And he was called, as unhinged as I can be, right? He was calling Trump psychopathic killer, fascist, like all the words that we use, right? But all in one, like he just
It's like
and
a
I was
runaway
just
rant kind of thing.
Yeah.
I was like, screen record, this is juicy, right? Like but then after a while I was like, oh no, that's not fair. I'm not gonna blow that up for him, because like this is an honest moment. And I let him have it, but it would make for a great ad for the NDP. Like, I know Charlie's talking that stuff, but it kind of hit different coming from Matthew, who understood like the truth there. But yeah, that was a bit of a side note.
I saw you mention it on X, Jessa. Now that you're talking about it, and you were mentioning how instructive his words on activism and on organizing were. And I think there's a little something that's happened because of the Trumpiness, the tariffs. We just came out of a really brutal election in Ontario, and as somebody who works with people on ODSP, there was a real sense of despair, and I would say, almost a collective depression across the province, for a lot of people when we came out of that ugly super majority, or whatever we're calling it now. And this Trump enmity seems to have dispelled that. And I'm not saying it's real. It does feel quite artificial, but it is also kind of galvanizing. And I think people really need that right now. We've been in the depths of winter. It's been a really hard time for a lot of people, especially a lot of the people that I work with. And the idea that, we can come together, regardless of what might be driving it, and create some social change based on some of this is motivating, because there was a real sense that we had lost momentum in a very fundamental way after the Ontario election.
Yeah, another factor that plays into that is not just like galvanizing, as in like it brings us together, but pushes us forward in maybe different paths. So now, like, especially
Great.
Ontario organizers, they have tried all sorts of tactics against this Ford government for years now, and they can safely say that almost none of them were effective. So you have to, like, then you can ratchet up an eye, right? It's, if you had gotten a new government, a liberal government, how long would you have given them to make good on these critical promises, these life-saving promises, before you're like, all right, let's mobilize against them? No, right now you're like, all right, this fucker doesn't listen to anything but, mass movement, right? He buckled eventually on the almost general strike to a degree. I know. Like, we could have a whole side conversation on how that went down, but in the end, Ford did not really win. And he had to kind of backpedal on the green belt, even though then he erased a lot of those gains as well. So folks are just like, we got to try something else. Like, we've got to be more disruptive, more aggressive. Yeah, and everyone can be like, we can do this all together, right? Everyone's got to beef with them now.
Well, I think on the third run, we all, we had asked, as the PWD vote, which was voting bloc of disabled people. We'd asked for the ODSP, the doubling of ODSP, which the other three parties had all put in their platforms, to happen within 60 days, because we have learned over the past two elections what exactly it takes to force Doug Ford to make change. And the only concession we've really seen is him increasing ODSP by, I think it was 5% in the last election. So the idea that there is something that we can get behind feels better than that, for sure.
Absolutely. Let's move on to, unless anybody else has got something to say on our tariff war.
I guess I was going to throw in, we have had basically no response from Scott Moe in Saskatchewan. Like we basically haven't had a leader for the last 3 months. Like he's kind of there, but he doesn't do anything. And
okay.
It's kind of funny. I think he came out with a statement yesterday regarding the tariffs, just saying, hey, yeah, we're in support of whatever the federal government is doing, which is an interesting statement from him. But yeah,
that must have been pulling teeth to get that out of him. He's the worst. I'm sorry. It must be just a trial to watch him continue to win election after election as well. He just seems dead in the soul.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Yep, for sure.
Cory's like, no arguments. Yeah, there's no life there.
No,
Like,
he's just
all
useless.
the premiers are competing for worst, right?
The bottom of the barrel. Yeah.
The bar is in hell, I think, was a reply to one of my tweets. I was like, yes, that. I think we were talking about possible NDP leaders, but in general, the bar is pretty fucking low. For all these premiers right now, because like even in BC, he's up to using these tariffs. The BC NDP, EBI or EB, whatever, is using these tariffs to push through a lot of energy projects that we shouldn't be doing, and that should take a lot more due diligence, and it's just really set to make Americans rich anyway. So like, I don't know if we've seen a real decent response, but
every province is no longer buying American alcohol. Somehow that's going to make a difference.
A lot of cities have done Buy Canada initiatives, and they're going to cancel a bunch of contracts. We'll see how this all plays out. I mean, I feel like every week we need a tariff war update, or at least monthly. Tune in next month to see what happens on the April 3rd deadline.
Tune in tomorrow.
Yeah, who knows?
It can almost be day to day right now. With like literally this week has been day to day in regards to what the new tariff is, if it's going to be applied today, if there's a counter, if that's going to be rolled back, is that back into place, is it being changed, are we now canceling the contract, are we re-signing up to the contract? Day to day has been that.
Meanwhile, Galen Weston is laughing his ass off.
Yeah, they're buying everything from me. Yeah, fuck. But let's go to some good news, shall we? Shall we go to some good news?
Sounds
good.
Good.
I've put the banner up there, but Joe, if you could do any of the sharing today, because my computer's about to explode or something. I got just spinning wheels everywhere. So
I can always do that. So we could start off with voila.
Are you gonna pull up this? Yeah. So this is not a wholly recent ruling. It was in January, but we didn't talk about it, and I just thought we'd bring it up because I saw a really good video put together by The Rover. So folks are looking for some sources on Instagram for Canadian news. They seem to focus mostly on Quebec, but yeah, really great source there. And they highlighted just like why this ruling out in Quebec against Hydro-Quebec, which is a Crown company, is so important. So they've been fined $5 million, which, probably isn't a lot for a Crown company, especially one that is dealing in energy. But it's, the kind of the story behind it. So they were found to have been acting in bad faith. That's the legal language around it. And that's a fucking understatement. So, Hydro-Quebec, yay, we have nationalized energy, but boo, like they displaced so many, like they just flooded the shit out of the James Bay community without consulting with the Cree First Nations. I mean, it's been endless. There's been many, many court cases trying to reaffirm the right to self-determination. That area is governed by the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, which does assert self-determination for the First Nations there, and the Innu First Nation, but they just keep reneging on every part of the deal. They went and built hydro lines where they shouldn't have, and had a court ruling, and eventually they just dogged them every which way you could possibly do, dragged out negotiations and failed to consult when there was promises to consult. And it's just like real colonialist behavior, right? Like, here's a treaty. Oh, we broke the treaty. Here's a new agreement. Oh, we broke that new agreement. Here's like a legal ruling. Oh, we're in contravention of that legal ruling. And this, like, First Nations just over and over and over, Indigenous folks having to use their resources to go to court and hold people just accountable to previous fucking court rulings. And so they did. They got $5 million, and, maybe they'll think twice, because part of the ruling that, makes it historic to a degree is that because it's a publicly owned, a Crown Corp, it has, I want to get the language right, heightened obligations towards Indigenous people, a duty to consult and following by the guidelines around reconciliation that the federal government has already been forced to be held to. I was going to say agreed to, but, fucking kicking and screaming. So, there's now legal precedent for folks, but in terms of fighting against Crown Corps, and more reasons to nationalize your public utilities. I know, like, you don't want $5 million lawsuits, but it's that leverage point, right? To then it's easier to hold these companies and these industries accountable when they are publicly owned. So I know maybe that was a new news item for you, because like it got almost no news. So that's why we're highlighting it. But any of you want to respond to that, or any of the issues it brings up for you, other than fucking colonialism?
Yeah, no, it does seem quite like standard practice for the state or private industry to as well, to just ignore the rights and agreements with First Nations. It reminds me of a case in Saskatchewan a couple years ago where like an oil company did some horizontal drilling, and they were drilling underneath the Pheasant Rump First Nation, and they ultimately got caught and got in a bunch of trouble and had to pay a bunch of money because
how much money?
Peanuts. Yeah, for what they were worth, yeah, it was definitely peanuts. But they, it's one of those things. Like, this is just how these companies and states act towards Indigenous people, and there needs to be a better way, I guess, of preventing it or holding them to account in some way, rather than these lawsuits after the fact, because it's already been done, right? Like,
yeah. And it really begs the question, like, how much are people expected to take? Like, really, this is egregious. And I know that the federal government's made a lot of progress on cleaning up some of the polluted water sites. Like, I think I saw that, I don't know, it was like 105 out of 150 they'd made progress on, but that still means there are thousands of people who cannot drink their water, and are forced to take, whether it's boiling or buying, are forced to take additional measures that would not be the case if it were a city in a different area, for example. And I like, when does this stop? It doesn't seem like legislation even matters to hold people to account anymore.
No, it's like a never-ending cycle, right? Like, do they pay this $5 million? And then do they change their behavior? And then if not, like, does this First Nation have to go back to court? So yeah, it's a never-ending cycle. And I think we can move to the next topic here, because it's so tightly tied to it, and that is Grassy Narrows. So doing my notes here for Grassy Narrows, initially the story is about they just broke ground to build these care homes, or a care home. And it's because there are so many, 90% of the people in Grassy Narrows are impacted either like physically or mentally, economically, but 90% are physically or mentally impacted by mercury poisoning. So for folks who don't know what Grassy Narrows is, I mean, especially if you're outside of Ontario, you definitely may not have heard of it. It's a campaign that's been picked up by Amnesty International. So it is like a global blight on our record amongst many other things. But back in the 60s and 70s, there is still fucking the Dryden paper mill released tons of mercury into the water, which obviously contaminated the water and the land and the people on it. And like, this is known, this is proven. There's been a lot of court cases related to it, but none have been sufficient. So they have not cleaned it up. They haven't even closed the paper mill or stopped it from continuing to contaminate the water. So it's not currently dumping mercury as far as we know, but there's been many studies done that show, Joe's showing one now, that show that it continues to pump in pollutants and contaminants that are impacting the health of the community there. And like, Doug Ford will not address this. This is what they've done. So they've spent maybe like $150 million total between like the community and the building for just treating the symptoms of this poisoning. And so obviously this is not cutting it for the people of Grassy Narrows. So you can go to freegrassy.net to learn more about their resistance there. But, they held a vigil on February 25th, and they've done this for 4 or 5 years now at least, and the premier has never come down to it, which is in all their vigils and all these events that they hold for various causes. Like, he just refuses to even attend. We saw their run for Grassy Narrows, the river run that they do was demonized for including like Palestinian liberation within the run. And
Right.
yeah, they were actually I was waiting for an update from a comrade, but Grassy Narrows and some of their allies were out front of a Doug Ford fundraiser this morning trying to send a message still. So they are demanding that, well, first, it's a fight for self-determination, similar to, the last story that we talked about there, but also for compensation for the community there and to stop the contaminants. So whether that's closing the mill or taking steps to stop the contaminants from coming into their water. But, this is just one of the many battles that are being waged against Doug Ford right now.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just pull a line here, but I can't believe it's 2025 and we're still talking about Grassy Narrows and mercury poisoning. Like, there's this aspect of Doug Ford that I think informed a lot of the way that we were talking about ODSP and OW, which is he's just so obdurate on certain topics. Like, you can't move him, and so it got to the point in ODSP land where we were, openly canvassing the federal government and pushing the federal government and really criticizing the federal government heavily about the Canadian Disability Benefit, which is a federal benefit that was introduced because the provinces are not keeping up with compensation for disabled people. And the fact that that's the length that we have to go to get things done provincially is actually really frightening.
It is. And still no movement. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and it might be something that needs to be brought to federal, and maybe not necessarily have the federal have a fund coming from the federal government for disabilities, but at least putting in mandates at the federal level as to what the provinces are expected to do in regards to for disability, in regards to making sure that they do have they are giving the minimum level so that they can actually get the minimum amount of finances so they can cover rent, so they can cover food, so they're not struggling day to day where they're getting a quarter of the amount of money that they need just to survive at the basic minimum.
Yeah, it's so far below the poverty line, and so there is a federal benefit which was introduced, and when it was introduced 5 years ago, the idea of it It was supposed to lift people, disabled people, out of poverty, and now it's $200 a month, and that is not going to have the desired effect. So it's another example, I think, of the federal government trying to make amends for what is not happening at the provincial level, and people feeling like they've been utterly abandoned again.
Yeah, I imagine the people in Grassy Narrows too are very frustrated by having to kind of call this to attention every year. But they have a river run in September that folks can sign up for. They do get an excellent turnout, like I think it was 8,000 last year. So they're able to mobilize on this, and it looks like they're gearing up their fight. You know, like I said, they had a vigil on the 25th and then an action again today. So I don't think there's many movements now taking this sitting down, but to talk to I mean, we didn't plan on talking about disability, but it's a travesty that legislated poverty that almost every province keeps disabled people in, but that federal benefit, if we're bringing it up, it ain't shit. Like, that's not going to do, it's $200, and it's not, it wasn't implemented with the advice of the disabled community. They've almost gone against.
There's very, very high barriers. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's high barriers for sure to get in it, and it's not enough, especially if you consider that when we were in crisis, or we still are, but you know, during the lockdowns of COVID, that they thought $2,000 was what everybody needed just to kind of get through that moment. Yet they
Which was not extended to disabled people, by the way.
Right. Yeah, that's an important point, that they did not get. You had to have a job, right?
You had to have had at least $5,000 in actual income the previous year to qualify.
Yeah.
And so that left, 90% of disabled people in poverty out. I think that when you look across the federal landscape, and sorry, I didn't mean to hijack this and make it disability benefits, but it is a really big issue. There's not a single province that has benefits above $1,500, except possibly Quebec, which I think is at $1,568 a month, which is called deep impact poverty because it has such a deep impact on health, wellness, community, everything. And there's no sign that any of this is going to change.
No, it's like the same argument around raising the minimum wage too, and it might be a callous one, but when you raise the rates of ODSP, double it is what the opposition parties were calling for, and every fucking penny of that is going to go into your precious economy. Like, these poor people have to spend every fucking extra dollar.
Stimulus.
Yeah, there's no economic for it. It's eugenics, right? Like, because we're ramping up the MAID program at the same time we're denying disabled people. And so, like, when people go, like, how can we do that as a state? Like, you have to answer that the hard way. You have to go, well, that they actually want it that way, right? They're the same with the way that we're treating drug users, poor drug users in Ontario and beyond. It's, it's designed to lose people. Right, to say it as softly as possible.
4% of deaths in Canada are now through MAID.
It's pretty significant. That's wild.
Yeah, I'm glad that worked its way into the discussion because it isn't prioritized enough, right? Because the labor movement, for obvious reasons, like they focus on worker issues, even though we're all just like one accident or illness away from being disabled ourselves. It's like, it's not this like pertinent issue for them. So they don't bring it along as much as they should. And a lot of other movements are scrambling right now for things that are critical, and the result is the disabled community often doesn't get this. Like, we should all be, this is almost like a housing first kind of deal, right? It's lumped into this idea that if we don't at least bring up folks who don't have enough to survive, everything else is gravy. Even your bike lanes and all of the stuff that we need, it's all fucking gravy when there are disabled people that we have forced into poverty. It's not like a choice. It's like, this is your rate. You can't, like, they'll claw back anything that would possibly bring you out of poverty. And so it's forced poverty on our comrades. And
not just that. I don't know if you probably
get me all riled up, Jen.
I'm so riled up because I live this like every day because I raise money for folks. And now I've totally lost my train of thought. The stat is that around 50% of the homeless population in Canada is disabled for this reason, because they can't afford rent. I raise money primarily for rent now because that's the biggest expense and it's what people just cannot cover. And so when you go to encampments, you see people in wheelchairs constantly because that's where they have ended up because of the lack of support from the government.
Yeah, no, it's maddening, and I think this election loss was particularly hard. And I'm talking in Ontario again because all three opposition parties promised such a huge change, and they had problems in their promises. So we won't give them a complete pass on that. But with Ford winning, that seemed it nearly impossible because we could not get even the NDP to prioritize that issue in almost their entire term as opposition. In fact, Joel Harden was the disability critic for years and years, and if you check his feed during that time, he didn't say shit. Like literally, you'll find nothing. And so it seems like disabled people have been through this before. They know that it's just going to go on this back burner, and so it's if we can highlight it, it's something. But folks need to kind of pick this up in their movements as well. Disability justice is not just secondary to what we do. So
there's a real trigger for disabled people around anything that is compensation related that includes the word worker. Like, and they scan for it now because they know it excludes them.
Yeah, Cory, like, I don't know if I had this discussion with Cory or not, but like amongst especially Marxists and socialists, the term working class, we use it a lot. And you'll hear me say it a lot. And in my mind, I am doing those gymnastics because I don't have another term that adequately, or maybe I do and I'm just getting lazy, but people are like, it's just a term, you don't understand Marxist theory. I fucking do, by the way. And it's like, if it was just a term, and I know you mean it to include disabled people and children and seniors who no longer work, I know that, but your behaviors don't tell us that, right? Your behaviors actually tell us that you have excluded disabled people from the working class fight. And so we don't like the term just doesn't jive well. You have to understand that.
Matter, that's inclusive or it's not. And the minute you say working class, you are literally excluding thousands, millions of people from that movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, not to get too deep into the theory of it, but like people.
Well, we brought you on for a reason.
Marxists do, in fact, leave. Like they view the proletariat and the lumpen proletariat as separate classes. Disabled people, sex workers, the homeless, like the ultra poor, they are a different class than the proletariat, the working class. They see agricultural workers separate from industrial workers as well. So then, like, if you're looking at it from an anarchist perspective, you would maybe say like the intersectional working class or something else. You might expand it farther, but yeah.
I did not know that. That's a real education and kind of a gut punch.
They do believe they're separate classes for sure, but it also stems from the way in which capital creates them, right?
Yes.
Not that there should be, right? Like the goal is that there should not be, but there needs to be a sub-proletariat, something under the working class as like, this is what you could be. You don't work and this will be you. And it keeps you desperate to keep your job and to be, yes, boss, because exactly. I don't want to lose my job because I don't want to end up like the people that, are in the sub-proletariat. So it's like a necessity of capitalism. But, in the vision moving forward, it's not a separate class.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that Marxists all think that like the quote unquote lumpen proletariat deserves to be there. Like the point is to lift everyone up, right? But
right. Yeah, so it sounded worse, but some operate You know, like that's why
Humbly.
Cory's like, not all. I feel like not all men. I'm sorry, but like not all Marxists.
all
We've had some
Marxists.
really good ones on the show. And like, I'm a Marxist. I believe in Marxist theory. I understand it. It explains capitalism and it explains where we have to go. It's lacking nuance, though, people, and an update. But that's another discussion. Maybe, Cory, I'll come on your show. We'll talk about
And I would love to throw in here that I'd love to know what the Marxist opinion is on basic income, because that's
Oh,
the
that's
only
not
thing really that's going
universal.
to pull people out.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
You're not
going
going to
to
get.
disagreement there.
Yeah.
That's a conversation for another day, perhaps.
It is. Like, long story short, let's see if I can do long story short. Some will be like, yes, of course, everyone deserves like basic income and like not needing to scramble. And eventually we don't need to work the way that we do in order to sustain everybody. However, under a neoliberal system, it will likely be, and we have seen examples of it being used to scale back the social safety net. So, okay, I give you a universal basic income of $1,000, but you no longer get the child tax-free benefit. You no
Right.
longer get this benefit. Our healthcare, you know, will more the pay.
clawbacks.
Yes, because you
there's
can now
the,
afford it, you know, and will landlords do the same thing because we don't have rent control, and now they know every single one of their tenants is getting an extra $1,000 a week. You know, the threshold of what we can spare changes for them. So, but it is a whole episode in itself, and I'm happy to have that discussion maybe one day. Cory seems like he's keen to talk about it, but like we've got.
I've had a couple conversations about it, so it is something that has nuances and difference of opinion within it for sure.
I see someone has added a headline. So who wants to walk us through the federal
That would
court
be-
dismissing? All right, Joe, take it away.
I can take care of that one. So this one just came in this morning. Joanna, friend of Jen and I's, brought this one up in the chat, and it is in regards to the proroguement. There was a lawsuit after Trudeau prorogued Parliament, and it was two individuals down in Nova Scotia that decided, hey, this is illegal. Trudeau can't prorogue Parliament without a justification, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the judge
That's
dismissed
pretty
the case.
ridiculous. Oh,
Yeah, it was ridiculous. But they did dismiss the case, and I just wanted to capture the particular in the ruling made public Thursday. Federal Court Chief Justice Paul Crampton said the courts do have a role to play in reviewing the advice. It is important that it is exercised to maintain public confidence in the institutions of the government. However, he concluded, the applicants failed to demonstrate that Trudeau exceeded the limits established by the written constitution, the unwritten constitutional principles, or any other legal limits.
Unwritten. That's
yeah.
handy.
it's just
Exactly.
bizarre
Vague.
watching conservatives attempt to place these restrictions when, you know, Harper prorogued Parliament like 3 times in 6 months or something like that. The hypocrisy is never ending.
Yeah, we
There-
took to the
it-
streets one time when Harper prorogued government. I remember I had a Stop Harper Save Canada sign. Well, that was probably multi-use, but like it was a big deal. People were pissed about it, and like they stood firm that it was like a right of government. And and this is so tired. Like, no, it's done. Why are you wasting resources on this? Like, what are you going to accomplish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same with this loophole they're trying to close. Like Pierre Poilievre released a video on like creating this loophole. He's like really upset that for 4 months,
God, yeah, I saw that.
Buddy Carney won't have to disclose to the public what all his holdings are. Okay, well, like, yes, for everybody, that's all, but this is from the same fucker who won't submit to a security check, which I don't really care about. We've talked about that on another show. However,
And has a chef and a chauffeur and a residence.
Yeah,
unlike
and he's
any
standing there going-
other leader of the opposition in democracies.
yeah, but in terms of disclosure, you know, he's like, I'm not submitting to a security check, but could you believe that for 4 whole months, you know, 120 days, Mark Carney, we won't even know where his assets are. And it's like, well, you know, you elect
we keep talking
billionaires,
about
that's what you get. I mean, I figure that's a given. Liberals have just like decided they're okay. Mind you, every party does that they're okay electing people with giant portfolios, like they've got the same vested interest as we do. But thanks for bringing that to attention. So I think
it was two guys that did it from Nova Scotia. And again, I tried to read through the names. Yeah, Dave McKinnon, and I can't. They don't seem to have the other person's name here. Sorry, David McKinnon and Ari Lavranos. I'm not familiar with their names, but
Is that who brought the challenge? Is that what you mean?
those are the two people who brought the challenge in there.
Oh, we're learning so much about law firms and their ties to conservatives, and that came up a lot in our interview with Eve that we dropped this week.
I don't think these guys were conservatives or lawyers. I think they were just possibly chuds.
They can be all of the above, can't they?
That's
Corey's
true.
nodding his head. He's
That's
like,
true.
yeah, this is.
I-
There's a vector that meets.
That's right.
There-
There's a Venn diagram where they
Thank
all
you.
fit.
I was lost for words there, which is not good.
It's funny because you guys have seen, obviously, especially for you, Jessa, you've seen a lot of sort of lawfare being used in regards to when conservatives are bringing in regards to Eve Engler and quite a few others. I'm also used to watching some of the guys from that were convoy related, and they would, a fair amount of them are sovereign citizen. So when you see these guys going into the courts to do stuff, it is hard to watch, but bring a bag of popcorn. It's not to say it's hard, but it's not entertaining. It is entertaining. For
It
I
doesn't
love
example,
hearing
first thing-
settlers talk about sovereignty. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Shut up.
The most
I don't
interesting
know
is
if
always
any-
the
Sit
first
down.
person.
Spend much
Sorry,
time on TikTok, but there is an entire sovereign citizen video library on
Yeah.
sovereign citizens' encounters with the police, and they're pretty
I know.
wild. So if you've got a couple of hours to kill, I would
I
highly
do draw-
recommend seeing some of those.
Yeah, we all draw joy from watching like cops being told what the law is and having to stand down. So I'll admit to watching a couple of those going snicker snacker, everyone knows their rights now. It's a big problem for ICE too, right? Watching clips of people stand in the street with megaphones and remind everybody, you don't have to open the door. If the warrant's not signed by your judge, don't open the door. All your details have to be right. Tell them to put it under the door. And they're openly admitting that their job has become more difficult because of the red cards people are handing out where folks are learning what their rights are. So, those know your rights campaigns, even though they're always changing, they do have value because one of the best things they did in Venezuela was equip everybody to know what their rights are, right? Literally handed out accessible versions in indigenous languages as well, what their constitutional rights were. And so it's really hard to take them away once you know what they are, right? You may lose political
that's
power.
amazing! Wow, what a great idea! I didn't know that. That's awesome.
There you go. You can thank Chavez. You can put up a poster. Well, I don't have Chavez, I don't think. I have Cesar Chavez.
Yeah, we need some of those here for sure.
Okay, I just kept doing that to Joe before we logged on. Let's go to our disruptive updates. There's a few of them, and I apologize, not all of them are great. A lot of the times I like to share victories, but sometimes they're also cautionary tales of what's going on in terms of the grassroots protests, direct actions, different campaigns. We did share a lot of victories in last week. So, there's value to watching our library there, especially if you go to the second half. Past the headlines is, all kinds of organizations getting shit done and victories, kind of like the ones we've already talked about. But I wanted an update for the Grassy Narrows event today, but understandably, comrades are busy. But Doug Ford is going to be dogged everywhere he's going. He had, I think it was $95 a plate, which isn't all that bad for Ford. That's entry level Fordism. And he was met with protesters outside demanding justice for Grassy Narrows. I heard it. What do you got there, Joe? Did you bring this up? Are you?
No. This
You're
is the
leading
next
me.
one.
You're
I'm
leading me.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the inflammatory kind of headline. I was trying to think of a headline. I just took it straight from the IG account. Where is it? Anyway. Sorry. Brain fart. UBC staff member abducted by the RCMP. That was the headline. So obviously I had to take a look at what happened. Is that a video, Joe?
No, this is just the page itself.
Okay. So
Statement.
on the UBC student page, you can find video of this. I should have flagged it, but it's an alumni and a staff member of UBC was simply walking past the location where the Invictus Games are happening right now. And we talked about that and why there might be a little bit of tension there, because they have Israeli soldiers competing in the Invictus Games, which is for veterans. And we can talk about veterans another day, but IDF soldiers are not welcome here, right? I don't care what state they're in, former or current. And obviously there was a campaign to stop them from having the Invictus Games, or at least stop the Israeli soldiers from attending. It was not successful. And when this gentleman was walking past wearing a keffiyeh, not chanting, not holding, an obvious sign or disrupting, not that that would be grounds for picking him up either. The RCMP grab him, they throw him in the back of a van for 30 minutes without charge, and they release him. And, the inflammatory headline, being abducted, I mean, that's valid. That is unlawful detention. You can't just simply have someone you deem a little bit of a nuisance and you throw them in the back of a van. This is a fucking Gestapo. So what's the video you got lined up
This would
here?
be the video I think you're mentioning.
Okay, let's. So yeah, he's already been stopped. You can hear him asking, like, why are you detaining me?
Yes. It's in my left pocket.
Best one after.
Yeah. No.
So rather than run the whole thing, I'm going to take that down to and just describe, like, you'll see him getting walked away and he is yelling at the top of his voice, I am a UBC staff member. I was only wearing a keffiyeh. They have not told me why I'm being detained, and they take him off screen. And that article that Joe brought up at the beginning was him kind of recounting this experience. So, I mean, the interview that I'm going to drop on Tuesday for Blueprints of Disruption is with Jeremy Appel, and we are talking about the University of Calgary working with police to brutalize students. I mean, you'll have to wait till Tuesday to get the full story. I mean, he's written about it for The Orchard, so it's not like a scoop entirely, although he does share some things that he didn't put in the article. But, there's lots of examples now of university administrations working closely with police, green-lighting police to behave this way on campus. It's largely in response to the encampments that were set up last year, and the movements that have continued from those encampments on campus, to divest from Israeli companies, from weapons manufacturers, as well as academic boycotts as well, BDS. So, seeing this kind of behavior here is got to be on the minds of student organizers on campuses right across Canada. So one reason we wanted to highlight, not to scare folks, but just realize what admin are greenlighting on your campus here.
Yeah. And what's, I think, really shocking, maybe not given the history of activism in the U.S. and how much more concerted some of those efforts have been, especially, back in the olden days in the 70s. But we are more fascist about this issue in Canada than we are in the States. And maybe this is something you've covered on the show before, but it's shocking to see the amount of repression that's happening here. And Joe and I obviously have a very strong personal connection to this issue with Dina having been jailed for so long over such trivial things that have been labeled hate crimes. It's just bizarre that we are so much more restrictive. You probably saw some of the Barnard coverage, and certainly, the police were absolutely vicious, but you had thousands of people out, and that is just not really happening here on campuses to the same extent.
Did you see Trump's recent statement about universities and protests?
Oh my God, yes. It is pure fascism.
Yeah, I don't know, Joe, are you clacking away trying to find that? But it was, I mean, it's not a surprise. He said it before he signed an executive order talking about, supporters of Hezbollah and Hamas being able to be deported. And actually, one of the disruptive updates that I have for today, again, is not a great one, but it's of a Chinese student, I think out of UCLA. Anyway, they are losing their visa. So deportation might not be the correct word, but they are essentially being forced to leave because they were involved with organizing against genocide on their campus. And so the promise of, removing people, which is what Trump. Oops.
They're interchangeable.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone forgives me for that. So he's basically said, if you're going to allow protests on campus, you're going to lose funding. If you're wearing a mask at a protest, I think it's all yeah. You going to say something there, Joe?
Yeah, there's one particular part of that headline, because it's what Trump says, that should get everybody up very concerned, which is Trump threatens cutting funding cut to colleges allowing illegal protests. The hell is an illegal protest?
Well, I guess that's to be
Pretty
decided.
good question.
That's a couple executive orders from now, right? What he starts
That's
calling.
exactly it. If
Yeah.
he's
And I
talking about something called illegal protests,
Yep.
red alert.
Yeah.
We don't care very much about law firms, but there was a decision or an edict or an EO issued yesterday against Perkins Coie, which is one of the most progressive law firms in the U.S., has been responsible for the architecture of a lot of much lamented democratic policies, and they have had some kind. I don't even know what exactly has been enacted, but there's been some kind of action taken against a business in the United States, which is really and a law firm. I mean, if law firms are now targets, then anybody is.
Yeah, there's I think the tag on to the story that we did with Eves, that's the latest episode up right now, is that the same conservative candidate who runs a law firm or is part of a law firm that is working with Dahlia Kurtz to get him charged. Like Dahlia, part of the story, if you didn't listen to the episode, is that she brought all the evidence to Montreal police trying to get them to charge Eve with harassment or whatever the fuck they brought up. And they were like, no, this isn't a case. And then a few months later, Neil Oberman and his law firm, they chime into Montreal police and like, boom, then charges were laid. And now that gentleman, that Zionist pig, is teaming up with Dahlia again to go after Senator Wu, who, voiced solidarity with Eve's fighting his bail conditions, which was a gag order. And so, yeah, we call it Zionist lawfare. At least that's a term that Eve says in the episode, and I've really glommed onto it because, like, everyone knows exactly what you mean now. Well, maybe not. Like, once you learn how deep it is, like the Ontario, I don't know, I've mentioned this before, and if you're a listener of the show, you know this already, but it needs repeating. There's, like, an office in the Ontario Attorney General's office. So that deals with all like kind of Crown prosecution. That is a working group on hate crimes. Okay. But it has an explicit mandate that it look or get itself involved with cases stemming from protests revolving around the Middle East. They won't even say fucking Palestine in their stupid memos to each other. It's like the refusal to just admit there is a Palestine. So they say the Middle East, but they mean Palestine. They don't give a shit about any of the other, Lebanon maybe might be grouped in there, but otherwise they mean Palestine. And so they explicitly are tasked with making those cases or putting those cases under larger scrutiny. And so what that is happening, it's resulting in is, local attorneys, prosecutors are encouraged to not make deals, right? Like they're looking at these charges going, like, mischief for standing in the middle of the road. What the fuck? What do I do with this? And, they're getting, the Crown is in their ear at this working group. And so they increase the charges, or they, press hate motivation factors through the courts. And, it's leading to stronger bail conditions because of the backing that this has from the Attorney General's office. And it's just, it's next level. The the how Canadian law is being utilized, especially by free speech advocates, right? Like the fucking conservatives love to be free speech this, free speech that, but they are cheering on suppression of their political opponents, like in the most worst way, like jail, not just like shut them down, don't listen to them, or, you know, whatever, you know, we want them locked up. And yeah, so
Brutal.
they're not the updates I like giving, but folks need to be paying attention, because Polyev,
And how
even
like how do we tell people to plan for this? Like, how do we tell them to make sure that this isn't something that's like, there's fear out there. There is real fear of people are planning for, like, what happens if I end up getting carted off to jail? Like, in some cases, how do I get my business managed? What happens? How long am I going to possibly be there? There's just so much uncertainty and so much oppression that it's having the desired effect, which is a dampening effect on activism.
I would say, though, it's not all that dampening. You know, I think people are being openly defiant of it, and it's maybe it's working its way into our discussions on like how we organize and what we can expect as far as resistance. But I mean, if we're talking about it in the way that we're talking about Eve and the campus crackdowns, that's explicitly about Palestine, and knowing what's on the line and what Palestinians are experiencing from like everyone we've interviewed that has been arrested and faced multiple charges, and even talking to Eve, who had to spend like 5 days waiting to challenge her bail conditions, is not unheard of, because it was over a weekend. But that's really what people could expect, and it's not slowing them down at all. I think they're forced to do this because we've been so defiant, right? They've tried this, and then we're like, fuck you. And then they try more crackdowns, higher charges, like steeper charges, and it's like, we don't slow down a lick. And so now they're unveiling themselves with these fascist tactics, these police state tactics that even their own supporters, when explicitly asked, do you think someone should be jailed for supporting or for protesting against the genocide or not agreeing with Israel or whatever the fuck. And they're like, no, like, that's crazy, freedom. And it's revealing themselves, right? It's a point of pressure that we could exploit for them to reveal, like, you support politics that don't really jive with your own values. Because look at what it actually is. And it is. But people do need to be aware. So, Jen, you'll be glad to know. But I think the last 2 or 3 weeks, the activist tip that we do at the end, that we'll get to at the end here, we have a new one that's not as maybe charged, but it was what to do when you're arrested. Last week was specifically on bail conditions, like what to expect, and shut the fuck up is the number one advice.
That's
right?
Great.
Because it's only a responsible thing to do if we're encouraging people to be disruptive and to challenge power, and then also acknowledging that the state is cracking down, is like, we'll give you the tools to do it as safely as possible, but also to be confident that, when and if you're arrested, it is not the end of the world. And I think the greatest example, again, of what to do is the Toronto Community Justice Fund and the community around it, that includes like legal observers and legal support. And so they create a community out of all the people that have been arrested. So rather than being isolated and not knowing what to do, and worrying about, someone watching your kids while you're at court, like, the more people you can network together just based on this trauma, right? This thing that's supposed to actually extract you from the movement. And it actually brings you closer to some of the people that are organizing the way forward.
Definitely seen a lot of that, for sure.
Yeah. So every city should try to kind of work its way to that, so, because I know who to call if I see an arrest happen. Like, I know who to jump on Signal and be like, are you in contact with this person? There's been another arrest. And, then because people have contacted me going like, I've been arrested for this and that. And they feel relief being plugged into this kind of, oh, we've been there, don't worry, like, we'll take care of you. And it might not be perfect, but it's where you have to start, kind of like a life house of legal support.
For sure.
And celebrate the arrestees, right? Like, don't let them, that criminalization, let it be street cred. Like, don't let that take anything away, right? So don't play into that, like that Trump is a felon, Trump is a criminal. He's a fascist.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with a lot of criminals. Okay, I did pass my kids' police check for the school, right? But if you don't, I'll still work with you, to some degree. Like, so, yeah. Let's not be broad with that label either. But anybody have any disruptive?
that's amazing content, because that is exactly what people need. It's the uncertainty, I think, of what's going to happen when something like that ensues. One of the things that I am seeing is that people are taking conversations private, and that's really unfortunate, because the more we see of people supporting, as toxic as social media has become, it is still a barometer for so much of how people are feeling and what they're passionate about. And I am seeing a reticence to be public about conversations around this still on social media. I really hope that tide changes soon.
Absolutely. Anybody here have any disruptive? Like, I've still got some. If anyone wants to steal one from the list that we're sharing, by all means. I don't have to monopolize the conversation. But if you've got a local one you want to share yourself, start waving at me.
Yourself.
All right. I got more.
I've got one.
yay.
Don't
Thank you, Jen.
don't hold a camera up to your face in court.
That's true.
I was
This
in court
seems
on
like-
Monday, and I was chastised by the judge, who thought I was recording her when, in fact, I was just looking at my phone. So there's one tip: do not be disruptive in court. That is not going to help your case very much.
No, that is advice we give for even jail support outside. Treat it more like a vigil than like another protest that you're at, because you're not probably going to help your comrade on the inside by being a pain in the ass on the outside of the jail. So, but honestly, please listen back to Eve's interview that we put on Blueprints of Disruption. It's here on YouTube if that's where you're watching, and it's also an audio podcast wherever, at all the places. But he talks very candidly about his time, behind bars, and like what the experience was like, and the delays and what was behind them. It brings up systemic issues as well, that, incarceration. So it seems like anybody that goes through the system also becomes a bit of an abolitionist as well, or at least like really critical of the act of incarceration and just what that means. But it's uplifting in that you can hear that it didn't daunt him at all. Like, he made it a point to come back out and get right in the face of the next press conference that some elected politician tried to hold, So, but challenge those bail conditions, people. It's not just for you, it's for the movement. But you can go back to last week's, where we really kind of unpack why that is. And we talk about that in the episode as well.
That's great. And I was just going to say, depending on how long you're inside, and again, personal experience, not mine, but someone that we know quite well is now organizing on the inside, because they have been there for so long that, for example, got people registered and organized to vote in the provincial election, which was something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So you can do a lot even when you're incarcerated. So.
Oh, that's interesting. I'd like to learn more about that at some point, because there's a lot of actually good support groups around abolition and prison support. So if we can get one of those into the studio to talk about that work, I would love that. I'm going to move on to the more disruptive updates so we can fit everything into our attempted 2-hour slot. City workers, like City Hall, like the councillors, the staff that work with councillors and stuff, they at Toronto City Hall, they've all voted to unionize. So, are they going to make you sign up for something to show me that? So I thought, it's always nice to share stories of unionization. We talk about tenant unions forming all the time, workers unions kind of like a given, but SALT any workplace. So they voted. They've already got 60% of the staff signing on their union cards. So I'm not sure who's salting that and what union. I imagine it's CUPE, but oh no, sorry, it's AMAPCEO, which is actually quite a large public sector union, but it doesn't get as much airplay as CUPE. So it's always... Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's interesting to see this juxtaposed against the recent article by Graphic Matt I don't know what his name is outside of X, sorry about that, but about just how much difficulty Olivia Chow is having at City Hall because of the legacy of the staff that she's dealing with from the Tory years, and how how political they are, but not necessarily in the sense, Olivia's a pretty left person, or has been. And apparently she's been really fighting the system. And a lot of people, including myself, have been very critical of what we have seen coming out of City Hall during her tenure. And that certainly does explain a lot. And it's a very interesting dynamic.
I'll have to read more about that as well, because we are at the halfway point of Olivia's term, and a lot of people are frustrated by the lack of action on some issues. So to hear the backstory as to, or at least why, the reasons they're telling us why we are so disappointed, it would be interesting to hear. But
honestly,
yeah.
the policies of her administration around unhoused people, etc., have been worse than Tory. Like they really have. They have been a regression. And so, at least to understand, we knew that the city staff were a big driver of that under Tory, but to understand it's still happening under Chow, and that she hasn't really been able to dislodge that is also very disheartening.
It is. Yeah, I think people had high hopes, and I'm get so frustrated getting a petition from Progress Toronto telling me to appeal to City Hall to do the most basic shit. And I was like, I remember you putting all hands on deck and running a huge campaign for Chow, and now like your work doesn't seem to have lessened at all. So they might think twice about trying to, anchor their ship that much to a politician, which is a shame, because we're trying to get good folks in office, and it seems that maybe isn't the solution. Not that we haven't shit on electoral politics here before, but let's not get into that again. We don't have time for that. So another update before the activist tip of the week is we've talked about this many times. The Liberals have made horrific changes to the visa programs for many categories of migrants. And students in particular, international students, have been hard hit. But they're not alone. Right now, 3,000 permits expire every day. So we talked about, after a year or whatever the time frame was, there would be close to 1 million people who would become undocumented or be forced to leave. So they either live here undocumented or be forced to leave. And they've even made it more expensive to be deported and less likely that you will come back if you have to be deported. And it's put a lot of people into fucking crisis. As you can imagine, 3,000 people a day might be in a position where they have no idea what their legal rights are, or what they're going to do, or what they can do even. And so the Migrant Workers Alliance has put together a few workshops specifically for people in that position. I'm going to drop it in the comments there, the link to sign up for that. So if you are an international student, or one, anybody that is getting to the point or are at the point where they are undocumented or their visa's expired, it's important that they team up in the same way we're talking about arrestees teaming up to one another, to find out the examples of people fighting back. Like there are levels of recourse and advice out there, but also there's a lot of mobilizing to be done. So they're putting a call out for folks to join their sessions to learn more about it. But I think right now they're specifically targeting folks who either work with migrant workers or folks who are directly impacted, because that's the kind of organizing that really pays out.
It's been really depressing to see how pliable the Liberal government has been on this issue in particular. I mean, obviously around people's rights, but also around the fact that, one of the reasons why Trump is being successful in pushing us around a bit is because we are not a big country, and the goal of 100 million would make us a much more substantial factor in global politics. And if we don't get to that kind of growth, we're going to be a rounding error. And I know that a lot of people don't agree with this position, but if any country in the world should have more people. It's Canada, and we are getting to the point where that is not going to occur if these policies continue, and that has a direct relationship on our impact globally as well.
Absolutely. And I think like it's worth mentioning because like we've said it before. People are thinking, oh, but there's so many, like they had to do something. There's too many migrants, and that's the reason for my housing and my health
Can you
care.
guys
And
still hear me?
Corey, you chime in because you're shaking your head
Yes, we
there. What do
can.
you tell people who say that?
That's just factually not true. Like it's always developers, it's always the people who are like in charge of the housing that are causing the prices to go up. It's like things like gentrification, like the tearing down of affordable housing to build and develop expensive condos, shit like that. And yeah, like I think maybe it was your show or maybe it was another show like this, but yeah, like we need to hit like 50 million people by 2050, don't we, to stay economically viable? Like this is
And relevant, yeah.
I mean, under the current
under the current
circumstances,
system.
right? Like ideally we get to kind of change those, but economic migrants are a reality. Climate migrants are going to be are already and will be more so of a reality. So we have a responsibility also to take folks in. Freedom of movement is a universal human right.
Yes, that's
FYI. We didn't cross the borders crossed us mentality. I mean, like that's my standpoint, but
For sure.
Another way to fight against this type of legislation and the mentality and the exploitation that faces migrants, right? Even when they are here, they're under horrible kind of conditions, migrant workers especially, but international students were easily exploited. And the answer to that, a lot of migrant worker organizations are fighting for status for all. So you can join that campaign. There's a petition, Status for All, at migrantrightsnetwork.ca or org. And, you might balk, like, that's crazy. But at one point, the Liberals said, yes, that's the path that we're going to take. And then they took this one instead. So fuck them.
And we're seeing an increased number of people who are undocumented in our fundraising requests as well, which has never happened before. Like in the past 6 months, I'd say probably 1 out of every 5 requests that comes in for support from us is from somebody who's undocumented and English isn't their first language, which just makes things so much more difficult and complicated.
And yeah, with the, knowing that fact, 3,000 visas a day, that number is going to grow. We know, like we gave examples of some food banks that were allowing first year international students, that were, a lot of examples of people turning away undocumented people from various levels of care, like the shelter system in Toronto. There were reports. And so, yeah, it's just once we start scapegoating that way, all of this behavior becomes kind of acceptable to us. And that is wholly unacceptable, right? Yeah. Right? Everyone nod? Yes, yes. Jen is nodding. She chimed in verbally to make sure I'm on the record.
Can you see me nodding violently? Yes.
Yeah, we need a new avatar for you, like a moving one. If you come back on, we'll make
I am so sorry about that.
No. Don't worry. I mean, it's better than what you logged on with. We won't even mention that. But
no, that was a bit of a joke and an unintended permanent joke. So.
No, that happens to me too, because like one of my Zoom accounts has this like horrible picture of my cat mid yawn, and it's like this snarl, and he's a black cat, and it's like really kind of scary looking. And I log on serious meetings sometimes, and that is the photo that's facing everyone. And I'm like trying to quickly change it. I'm like, oh shit, no one's gonna take me seriously now.
But technology, our friends, are not so much.
Yeah, and I'm not sure anyone takes me seriously anyway, so it's okay. It's okay. Let's go to the last segment of our show, right? It's a 3-parter: headlines, disruptive updates, and now we do an activist tip of the week. And I mentioned, we've done what to do when you get arrested, how to look at your bail conditions and fight them. We did week pasting one week, how to make your own glue to poster. And they all come with cautions, as does this one. We're talking about banner drops. So if folks are like, what is that? So you can imagine like a highway overpass is an example. Sometimes maybe on the foyer of a building you want to draw attention to. The idea is that you've got like a really kind of simple statement to make, but you want to make it big. And, low tech, you're talking about a big cloth banner. But some of the examples as I'm reading through here, there's two resources that Joe is pulling up there too. But one of them is like, people have used weather balloons to raise banners up high, and Greenpeace and Just Stop Oil, I think, is famous for using cranes. I am not going to advocate for cranes or any of the heights. If that is your thing, you need to be trained. You need to have the right equipment. Like, you can get at heights training. It's actually quite inexpensive. I know some folks that draw murals, and they got it just so they can use the scissor lift and, not kill themselves.
I can assure you, you're never going to be able to catch me doing this particular, because I have a thing for heights. I'm just looking at this thing, and the only thing screaming in my head is nope. I mean,
if you know a crane operator, that would help. Maybe they could just bring it up with them next time, leave it on their way down. But in reality, like, I'm not advocating for that, but that is a tactic people have used, or at the top of buildings. The idea is to have like high visibility, right? Mm-hmm. But to do it in a safe way. But when you're determining your location, think of like, one, can people see it? How many people will see it? Is it worth my time? But who's going to see it? Like, who are you talking to? Are you trying to draw attention to an upcoming event? Like, not like you don't do banner drops to be like, come to my lunch and learn. I mean, G7 is coming to town. You want to make a statement about what that means. Who's the best people you want to see that. So when you're scoping a location, you think of that, but you also think of safety. So again, a heights thing, that's a whole nother ballgame. You need people who know what they're doing. But generally speaking, if you're just talking about an overpass or at a outside of an office building, say a mining company, a bank, just suggestions.
In front of a Tesla dealership.
A Tesla dealership. See, there's lots of places you can test this out, but you want to have like an escape route. Okay. Easy. Like, don't get yourself into a position, like example, like on a crane, but not that example where like there's only one way in and one way out. So you've definitely decided you're going to get arrested, because I strongly recommend you don't put a banner up and just leave it. There's lots of reasons for that. If it's an overpass, it might fall, and you will be liable for it falling on a vehicle. So
if it causes collision.
Yeah. Right. So you need to secure it tightly. Often cops will come up and I mean, if you're processing about Palestine, I can't predict what the fuck they'll do, but generally they walk up to banner drops and like make sure that you're not doing it unsafely for the most part. So just do that. Like, tie it up tight, stay with it. Also, someone could take it and then do things with it afterwards if you just leave it. Like, rip it would be like neither here or there because you've already abandoned it. But what if they utilized it in a way that is not what you wanted, and you're going to likely be held liable? So just take that into account. Also, the type of material that you use. Right, you can go to Fabricland and get some stuff, but it has to take up to the wind. It would be horrible if you and your mates, you all got together. You get together a couple days before, you paint the banner. That's a socializing thing. You should be doing that anyway, right? Like building community, wear a mask. And get together and decorate a banner. But you don't want to do it on some flimsy cloth that it just ends up ripping in the wind. You guys would be heartbroken, all the effort you put in, right? Because then you're going to get some comrades together. You're going to find a time and a place to meet. You're going to park your cars away from the location so it's not obvious that those are your vehicles. So you can just walk away from the situation if need be with your banner, One of the other things, if you are using the overpasses in Toronto, cops have decided like that's a no-go zone, specifically for pro-Palestinians. Also, if it's in any kind of neighborhood that's deemed a Jewish neighborhood, they were just basically clearing people out. We have examples of folks showing up with like 50 cop cars to clear an overpass protest. I don't think it was a banner drop, but just to give you an idea of what you might be up against. So another tip is plan what you're going to say or do when you're accosted by somebody. Let's say someone comes up like, what are you doing here? Like just a passerby. What are your rules of engagement? Are you going to just keep to yourself? Do you have talking points? Do you have things you want to hand out to people who have questions about what you're doing, to further engage them than just what you can fit on your banner? What are you going to say to police? What is your approach going to be should they show up? Are you going to listen to their instructions? Yes, of course you will. And so like don't go in without a plan on what to do if things go wrong, but also just like engage the public. Anybody here done a banner drop before?
Nope.
No.
Unfortunately, I've seen a couple. I've seen a couple, particularly on the with the convoy related people, having done a few of them, and that's really sort of warning. Also, I'd say is it might be received a bit as a convoy, depending what it is. So careful not to use too many Canadian flags.
Don't
but the other
use
one
any.
too,
Any.
Yeah.
I can save you
That's
that.
right.
None.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is the threshold to make sure. Just throw a pally flag on, no matter what it is, and then everyone knows.
Yeah. The other one is, I think, the West Coast BC also put in some rules and laws in regards to banner drops. So be careful. Take a look in regards to your legislation out there. I think they did it because there was a lot of banner drops being done by the anti-COVID and anti-vaccine people, and they were putting in up the banners, and law enforcement was getting concerned that they were doing this every weekend, and it didn't seem secure. So they were concerned that things could actually fall down. So take a look
Just
at
to
your
be clear,
laws.
anti-COVID and anti-vaccines are not the same people. I'm anti-COVID, so I wear a mask.
Yes. Sorry, yes. I meant when I say anti-COVID, I meant like the
I know.
anti-COVID as in they don't even believe COVID is a thing or it's
for
engineered. Yeah, the rabbit hole is deep. The rabbit hole is deep.
No, so that goes to messaging. Like, if you've not done your sign in a way that someone's like, is that convoy or not? You've made a mistake in your messaging, and you don't get a lot of room for it. So think about what you're going to say. Are you communicating something? Are you warning against something? Maybe you're blocking something. Like, you can use a banner drop to block an entrance. Of course, not everything we suggest here will be appreciated by all levels of authorities. So
There is an interesting tip here, and Joanna's quite correct, because this is something actually I've looked into, and I haven't found everything I
Yes,
want
I
to
just
in
saw
regards to
that.
this. But, oops, and I clicked the button by accident. Projectors are actually a very fantastic idea. You can get a large size, and you can project your message. There's no longer a safety issue in regards to something
Right.
falling down. It's light. The only
we've seen some
problem is
great
that-
ones too.
Absolutely. The problem is that it also requires less sunlight generally, although there is, and this is the one I've been looking into because I'm really curious, there was one that I saw in the States that was a laser base that appeared perfectly well during daylight. And I got by the looks of it, I think it was a blue laser from a distance, so that gets all kind of weird and dangerous if
like
it's not done properly. Yeah. But
I love that. It's like day and night, right?
Yeah.
If you have a nighttime action, someone around one of you. That's another thing when you organize, ask people what their resources are. Like, I swear you're organizing with someone that has a projector, that probably has a megaphone, has rope, or some ream of cloth in the basement. You likely don't have to pay a dime to do a lot of the stuff that you do if you just cull the resources. Like, that's step 2 in organizing. First, get together, make friends, right? Then assess your capabilities and make a friend with a pickup truck and a projector and you're good to go, right? But old-fashioned daytime banner drops, if you missed it all, just rewind a couple minutes and we've given you some tips. So like entry-level stuff, sometimes we're telling you what to do when shit goes south. Sometimes they're one and the same, right? We can no longer say, a simple banner drop won't really get you much trouble, or a sit-in. I mean, we can't give that advice anymore. All our advice, all of our suggestions for disruption, I mean, at any level. I mean, we just showed you an example of someone walking by an event in a kafia and being put in a police truck for 30 minutes. So, it all comes with that level of caution and that expectation that, you need a plan there. So keep that in mind. And of course, for legal purposes, we are never suggesting that people break the law in any way. However, we also recognize that by following the paths that are provided to us, we often don't accomplish very much. I mean, they don't really open paths right to the front gates. So also keep that in mind. I mean,
And they'll just arrest you anyway, even if you're not breaking the law. So
yeah, arrest and no charge. I mean, keep in mind almost all the stuff that we talk about and all the charges that we've even kind of brought up. I know, like, we have some examples of people getting breached and staying in jail without trial. But a lot of these charges that they're laying, although audacious, don't carry jail time with them. Right? Tickets aren't great. Criminal records aren't fun, to deal with. I get it. But it's not like folks are facing massive charges at this point. So, you just at some point have to decide what you're willing to do to get where we need to go. And only you can decide that. And there's a time and a place for everybody. Just we talked about it once before, but it came up again this week for me. There's some people that can't participate openly. Like, my name and face are out there. There's no going back in for me. But some people maybe feel a level of guilt of not being out and open about their political fights or beliefs. And I want to tell you that there's complete value in that position. You are so worthy, and no matter what kind of action you're doing, even if it's behind the scenes, but even more so, you're an incredible asset. I could not, what was the term that we use? Like, folks who are screaming, "I would hide Anne in my attic," are not actually the people who will be able to hide Anne in their attic, right? It's the people whose political beliefs are actually unknown and have not been flagged that could be the most useful moving forward for various reasons. So, if you are anonymous, and there's no shame in that. I mean, I do shame trolls all the time for coming at me, and I say, stay anonymous is one of my things, because I can't believe you just said that on the internet, and that's what I mean. But I hope that people don't read that as a slight to your anonymous online persona, because if you're doing the work, it still fucking matters. And if you can't do banner drops because you've got too much to risk and you can't be out there, that's okay. There's a role for you still. And that goes for all the tips that we give for folks. So maybe next week we'll try to include tips for folks that they can do from home while staying anonymous, so that I can just get behind my words a little bit, actions for my words there. So I'll prove it to you. I'll prove it to you next week that there are a million ways that you can resist without revealing your face. Also, wear a mask. Did I say that already?
Yes.
Anyway, look.
I just wanted to quickly say, Jessa, I couldn't agree more with your comment on needing to keep some of your activities a little bit behind the wall or the curtain. I actually advise people recently to consider deleting their social media accounts and starting with brand new ones because of that. Because I don't know how many of you have seen The Lives of Others, the film about what happened in East Germany and how neighbors were literally telling on each other to avoid their own legal issues. There's some of that coming, I think, if Trump has his way, and so people have to be careful.
Absolutely, yeah. It's I do say it's too, like, some things are on the internet forever, and so it is, I think, too late for some of us, but. Yep. There's definitely a point where, yeah, you can start to go the other way. But even if you have bonus tips, right? This episode's full of bonus tips. But if you're organizing, especially if you plan on being a level of disruptive, I use that word because it's like catch-all phrase, right? It can mean many things, but you may draw the attention of the authorities or perhaps the far right. It means you're doing a great job. However, you should always have some stuff that's happening underneath, right? Like, you have to be front facing because you want people to find you, right? You have to grow your community, grow and build. Like, you've got to let people in. You got to let people in, even if it's going to be scary, because we have to all connect. But, you can kind of have a lot of stuff running on different levels, like you can have a WhatsApp and then a Signal, for example, and have the more secure communications happening on a different level. So you're accessible, but then you can pull people in and not take unnecessary risks. But it's actually dangerous to keep everything below board, because if everything is below board, not only are you not accessible, that's actually a huge red flag. If you're holding picnics, what you need the socialization, right? So you need to kind of be public about some of this. So if you're having the picnics and you're doing community work, right? You're community org. But if you're like got this front facing a little bit and then like nothing you do is on the internet, you know, like nothing, they will assume you are doing the worst, right? You'll actually draw red flags that way. So it's like, think of a duck, really calm and cool on the top, and then the feet are just going like this underneath, right? They're up to all kinds of shit underneath the water. And that's really how you should organize in terms of creating resistance, because you can expect resistance back, right? So anyway, tune in for more tips
Great
next
advice.
week. We're here every Friday and stuff just comes spilling out of us for 2 hours. So I don't know how many topics we didn't have banners for because it brought up other topics. I'm so glad Jen brought up the Canadian disability benefit, shortcomings and legislated poverty. That was not something we anticipated, but it was wholly important. And we got some great engagement from the comment section. Some not so great engagement, but now I know how to kick people out. So there's that. I learned a new tool today. And so I appreciate folks who were constructive. And I very much appreciate the guests coming on and spending Friday afternoon with me, ranting constructively.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. And until next time.
Thanks, Jessa.
Have a good one.